Hi, everyone. This is Naicker from Spica Astrology, and this is going to be a series of videos presenting some research and discussions and furthering the conversation or initiating the conversation in Western tropical astrological practice to do with the Southern Tropical Zodiac, where they are being flipped across the hemispheres. This is something that I've been researching and collecting data for the last several months. And so this series of videos is going to be discussing and opening up the platform for astrologers practicing astrology to talk about it. What I found in going back and looking at research of people that have done this sort of conversation before is that it tends to just stick with a whole lot of discussions and opinions and concepts, conceptual arguments. But I really just mostly care about evidence-based astrology and research and looking at charts. So a lot of what we're going to be doing here, at least in this first video, is talking about what people are saying out there, what people have said about this issue or this topic. And then subsequent videos, I'll be showing through a lot more examples what I'm proposing in my view about it. So hopefully it will be interesting. And I just want to emphasize again, it's not about showing what's right or who's right, but it's my aim here is to show a cohesiveness or balance in the world of astrology, and that people should contribute to a conversation. And if something needs to be updated, then it needs to be updated. And I'm all for that from a practical practicing point of view. So let's get started. I'm going to share my screen, and then we will just go into it. All right, let's just move things around here. All right. Let's see, I'm gonna make me as small as possible on the screen. Okay, so I'm emphasizing that part of this discussion is to move us towards, as practicing astrologers, towards a more holistic form of astrology. And I'm doing that already because I'm practicing Western and Vedic astrology at the same time for my clients. And I've been doing so for the last 2 years with no loss of mind or, it's actually enhanced my practice a lot and my understanding of both systems of astrology together. So I'm always emphasizing sort of a diplomatic view, come together, and this bickering about which one is right and which one came first. And I really find that really detracts away from the professional unity of approach that is possible. And that's one of the things I'm going to be proposing here. So at the outset, this is what has happened to me as a snapshot. I've been tracking my, for want of a better word, my success rate as a professional astrologer since 2014. So I do monthly reviews on the consultations I do, and I keep a weighted track of the correct statements that I make versus all the other statements that come up during the course of a reading. So what you'd find is that and those are both descriptive statements, as in, describing the client's partner, describing how they met them, those circumstantial descriptive elements of astrology. So how much correct have those statements been? Weighted by country, because in the beginning I wanted to sort of see if there was a alignment with my astrolocality as a practicing astrologer. I thought that would be interesting. So, but a lot of these statements are also post-consultation. They are predictive in nature. So a client comes back to you after so many months and says, oh, what you said 3 months ago came true. And then there's a statement about, okay, that was correct or not correct. So those two factors have played into my own personal tracking and weighting of my success as a practicing astrologer, because I believe that self-review and self-reflection is a very big part of improving how we are practicing astrology for people, because otherwise we get into the sort of echo chamber effect, and I really just wanted to get away from that. So I have a big spreadsheet that sort of is tracking that for me, and it's a monthly review. And what I found is that, yes, while my success rate is in the 70s, the low 70s, it's not really what I'm aiming for. Okay, I've been aiming for something 80 and above. Doing Vedic astrology, I found since 2017 has improved my accuracy and success rate by about 10% roughly across the board. But the interesting thing here is that I found that my success rate for clients from countries in the Southern Hemisphere, applying the same techniques that I know work really well, has been pretty, not so to the mark. It's about 60%. And that, for me, as far as I'm concerned, is basically 50-50. And I really just don't think that that's correct. And I found a very big difference between that success rate and the success chance I've had with clients that are coming from the Northern Hemisphere, that are born in the Northern Hemisphere, or that are living in the Northern Hemisphere. And that just really, came across to me as something pretty interesting. It's quite a difference in the success rate in, mid 80s versus, 60%. And to me, that's a big difference. And to the client, I'm sure that that is also a big difference, because that's really what they care about, is getting the correct information when you're talking to them. So that launched me, thinking about, this was sort of happening around end of last year, where I was thinking about these things. And first, I honestly thought it was just like a country thing. Maybe I thought, in South Africa, because it's my home country, I'm not really settled because I'm moving around a lot, and I felt that maybe my grounding energy wasn't there. We make up these reasons, being sort of somewhat self-critical in that way, as I am. But then I also noticed with clients in Australia and New Zealand, and it became something to look at more. And I want to make this clear that I'm approaching this problem from something I've noticed about myself. It's not about trying to, prove anyone else wrong. I'm just trying to get to that quest for zero defect. That is a very big part of my Virgo-ness, okay? To pay attention to the steps and the process in that way. So it's a big journey for me in terms of improving my practice as a professional astrologer that I've noticed and that I'm going to be sharing with you. So then I started thinking, well, something in the Southern Hemisphere needs to change. But having practiced for so many years with people, that was a very uncomfortable place to go. Yes, I believe in the divinatory aspect of astrology. And that's sort of the crutch that I leant on to sort of save me from, feeling inadequate or feeling like I gave people wrong information. Because I do believe in the divinatory aspect of it in that regard, that you give people information that is appropriate at the time. And the methods that you use, sometimes, you use the incorrect chart and you give the person the correct information. So that has happened. So I'm not discounting that at all. I'm coming at this purely from a technical capability point of view. So just putting that divinatory part aside, this 60% or 50-60% success rating of mine for the Southern Hemisphere clients, even with divinatory, that is pretty bad, low in my opinion for myself. Other astrologers might have a different view and say 60% is good enough, but that's not good enough for me. So, right. So my hypothesis then became that I had to test the reversal of the signs, which are different in the Southern Hemisphere. And again, this is not how I've been trained. It's not how I've been taught. It's not in the textbooks that you read. It's not really suggested anywhere there. So this was, I understood, going out on a limb and saying something like this could, publicly lead to a lot of questions and attacks and things like that. But it's fine because, again, I'm coming at this from a point of view. It's a hypothesis. Let us test it. And what I found, as you'll see later, is that there's really shocking low amount of research on this from a let's look at charts with proper peer-reviewed methodologies. Because what I found is people say, well, sun sign, let's compare the sun signs. And they take the sun sign to mean what they're doing as a career. And we know from a traditional astrology point of view, that's not always the case. So apples and oranges sometimes get mixed into the conversation. So I wanted to try to create a set of videos that at least start the conversation in a more serious way, to move away from conceptual arguments and conceptual philosophies, and because again, that is very much in the mental space, and ground it a bit more with the chart examples and looking at things. So that's what this series is going to be about, presenting the Southern Tropical Zodiac. So I went back to the charts and the consultation recordings that I had from before, because I record my screen as well, so I can see what I was maybe looking at the time I made those statements. And I also, got a track record, got those charts and statements together from the Southern Hemisphere, because most of my retainer clients and loyalty clients are from the Northern Hemisphere, and I always wondered about that. That's a bit unusual, and as a practicing astrologer, when you're practicing and talking with people about their charts, you can feel how clicked into it you are. You can resonate with how that person is receiving what you're saying. Are they, yes, it's on the money, are you hitting the nail on the head with what you're saying? Or, their feedback is like, okay, yes, okay, I get it. So I found that difference there, applying the same techniques. So the technique wasn't changing. And all that was changing was where this person is sitting, who's receiving the astrological, conversation and advice from me. So I also took A-rated charts from Astrodata Bank database from Australia, New Zealand, southern parts of Brazil, Argentina, South Africa, and I'm trying to build it more as we speak. And I've looked at each and every one of those charts with their biographies where they are available. And usually, the basic thing to check is career, because that's something that's easily available about somebody, to check. So that's what I've been compiling, and it's over 100 and something charts. So I've done the research, I've got that compilation available, and that is what I'm going to be showing and sharing with you over the course of the series, again, to further the discussion and to open up the floor for other practicing astrologers who may not have looked at it from a research point of view, to just look at things again. My results were that it significantly improved things. And I'm not someone to just say something's going to improve something for no reason, because I'm aware that there are many ways of seeing the same thing in astrology. But whether the sun rules your 10th house, that is a very strong statement. Okay, sun linked to father, sun being the light of your life. It's a very strong archetype. For example, if you're a practicing traditional astrologer, you know that house rulerships make a huge difference in chart prediction for methods like profections, especially because the sign of the year, the lord of the year, changes completely if you swap the signs around. So those things I put myself through testing, looking at those many charts. So, and they seem to really start to make a lot of sense. Yes, I could have said someone was an engineer by looking at the 12th part of the midheaven or whatever. But when I swapped the signs, things were obviously there. And that's how I believe astrology or truth should be. It should be there, okay? The simpler something is, I believe, the closer to truth it is from a conceptual point of view. And from a practical point of view, it was much easier to say things and go back to the person and say, the next time they come for a reading, I would manually swap the charts, because the software doesn't do it for us at the moment. And that's what I did. And it just flowed. It just flowed, just as my readings for clients in the Northern Hemisphere just flowed. You can just go into a reading and start talking about 10th house ruler, midheaven, travel, nature of the mother, nature of the father. It can just go in that direction. And it was so specific that I found myself actually quite amazed and also quite shocked, and having this sort of existential crisis myself, because I'm also born in the Southern Hemisphere. But when I flipped the chart, it just made sense. And I know that is one of the popular arguments out there, or it works for me. But I'll show you in subsequent videos that I've also shared some of these charts publicly online, and people have got them wrong. So I'm going to show you that, but the point here I want to make, my results show that, and I tested with natal, mundane, medical astrology, astrolocality, synastry, and also by transit, which is the interesting one. Synastry is also quite complex now, but it's actually more correct. So there will be subsequent videos going into all these examples that I've looked at and presenting to you from both points of view, what's going on. I'm not sure if I have time to do both points of view, but at least from the Southern Tropical flipped point of view, I will be doing that. The mundane astrology has interesting implications as well, as we'll go into. So my conclusion, basically, is that the tropical zodiac used for Western astrology is truly seasonal, okay? Sorry for the typo there. It's truly seasonal, and I mean seasonal in inverted commas because you can talk about it as a season of light, or a season of day versus night. Okay, you can talk about it as a season of hot versus cold. You can talk about it as a season of directional change. You can talk about it as season, winter, summer, spring, and autumn. So whatever way astrologers want to discuss seasonal and the turning of that, which is the meaning of tropical, I'm all for that. I'm not saying that it's not any of those things. All I'm saying is that flip it. It's fluid across the equatorial hemispheres. While global trends do seem to be set in the northern hemisphere, I will, concede that point in the world today. That is how it seems to be happening. But for people that are born in the southern hemisphere, especially for politics that are happening in the southern hemisphere, for connections and joinings of people in the southern hemisphere, I find better results when I flip the signs to match the season, the reference that it should correspond to. So that's the conclusion that I've got. And so I think what I'm going to go into next is just showing you a couple of items of previous so-called research. Now you'll see none of these are really quantitative in any way at all. And really, okay, I will admit my background is in engineering, and as a scientist, and as a Super Virgo, I really do care about, tangible evidence and research in that way. Even if it turns out that, this whole study ended up being, incorrect, I'd at least want it to be out there in the open, and people should have a view about it. And I believe that really moving away from this conversational, this is what I think, I'm getting really tired of that. But I have to do them due service here, so I'm going to put down the so-called evidence or research that is currently out there. So Claudius Ptolemy, not an astrologer, a chronicler of sorts, in the 2nd century AD, wrote this book called Tetrabiblos, in which he basically says, since of the 12 signs, the northern of which are closer to than others to our zenith, and therefore most productive of heat and warmth, are Cancer and Leo. So he's attributing heat and warmth and the maximum directional in the sky, the northern, okay, latitude-wise. They assign these to the greatest and most powerful heavenly bodies, the luminaries, as the places of Cancer and Leo. And later on, he goes to assign the times of the year that are indicated by cold and lack of light or weak light, the months of Saturn, okay, the solar months, Capricorn and Aquarius. So one could argue that, in that statement, and you can read book 17 and book 22 of Tetrabiblos and get more information, on these things, because it extrapolates into a whole lot of other things with astrology. So I don't think here he's saying it's purely a seasonal paradigm, but again, with that word seasonal, which is how I'm looking at it, you can bunch into that directional changes, northern, southern, increasing daylight, sunlight, that whole paradigm and archetype of that model as a light is what I think is really what is happening here. And true to the fact, the summer in the northern hemisphere, maximum daylight, is really the point of minimum daylight in the southern hemisphere. Whether you want to call that, I don't know, winter or summer or gazoob as a season, who cares? But it's that paradigm, I think, of changing light equivalence that we kind of indicating here is a tropical paradigm. So tropical meaning turning, okay? So obviously turning of the seasons, and the seasons are coincidental. The turning of the seasons are coincident with turning of direction, the cardinal direction. So that's a chicken and egg situation. So anyway, the next astrologer I've got here is who's Dane Rudier, back in the 1960s. He's paraphrasing Mark Edmund Jones. And here he's saying, our European civilization brought its basic, not only conscious, but unconscious patterns of mind, its fundamental symbols to the Southern Hemisphere. There may have been South Hemispheric centers of civilization in South America and in South Africa, but these no doubt had their own symbols, their own Weltanschauung, and forgive my pronunciation, and therefore their own astrology if they were actually born in the Southern Hemisphere. Any culture south of the equator which accepts our North Hemispheric astrology thereby reveals its essential dependence upon societies which built these mental concepts and ways of life in more or less temperate northern regions. This is true today back in the 60s, of Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, and even South America. They really are all, as yet, cultural colonies of European nations and almost totally dependent upon social, mental, and artistic patterns of Europe. So obviously, for the time that he's saying these statements, you understand the world in the 60s was trying to get over the colonial hiccup and throw those shackles away. So, okay, just like some statements of Pingree when he talks about Indian civilization, they're a bit myopic and short-sighted. But what I'm taking away from what he's saying is the trends of the Northern Hemisphere tend to be followed by the South. You know, the initiation of technology, electricity, and railways, and all those things we could argue, could see the rationale of from that point of view. So I'm not going to totally say it's a bunch of nonsense, you know, the colonial implications aside, but from just the conceptual, new concepts in the world being born and things like that, I think there's something to it. But I'll touch on this later. I don't think that what's happening here is a zodiacal or seasonal imposition from north to south. I think it is definitely something else. So, astrologer Deborah Holding here in 2003 in a Skyscraper forum is paraphrasing astrologer Bernadette Brady, and she makes a statement to show that, you know, she's not really sure what she's saying, but she goes on to say it anyway. Most of the land mass of the Earth is in the Northern Hemisphere, so the Earth as an entity grieves in the Northern Hemisphere summer. However, I accept that we need a lot more research to fully understand the natural effects of the planets in the zodiac signs as they apply to the Southern Hemisphere. It doesn't seem to be a problem for the astrological approaches that are mainly divinatory, but I can see that it is for attempts to use astrology as a mirror for cycles of behavior. So, you know, the one argument there is, you know, most of the world's population is in the Northern Hemisphere, and well, therefore, you know, the trend is imposed upon the South from the Northern Hemisphere, and most of the minds that are thinking, and I'm like, okay, that doesn't, I mean, are Southern Hemisphere people like irrelevant, or their ideas are not, you know, so I really find that a little bit problematic. So I don't fully agree with that viewpoint. Because we don't know actually the full breadth of humanity's history. But what I can also say there is that she's acknowledging that there's need for research. And then I think is an important point. My main takeaway from it is that. Then there's astrologer Astrid Fallon from Belgium. Now you're seeing, you know, people just like going on about concepts, what they think it should be, and, you know, if we opted for inversing the signs of the Southern Hemisphere to make them match with the seasons, we will have people born close by, but on either side of the equator with opposite sun signs, and this doesn't make sense at all. However, I believe that inversion of the tropical zodiac should occur across the ecliptic rather than the equator, as proposed by French astrologer Max Duval. Okay, so again, and I've seen a lot of people online say things like, well, if it has to be flipped across the equator, then a person born on either side of the equator, they're going to have completely different sun signs, and that's like nonsensical. And my argument is, why is it nonsensical? It's nonsensical for you to make that statement without testing it. I think that's, for me, nonsensical. So get a chart of a person born 3 degrees north, 3 degrees south of the equator, and see. And I've got charts like that, and I can see the difference. So I know that it actually makes a lot of sense. It doesn't not make sense if you actually look at things. I don't know why we have this intoxication with everything needs to be uniform and the same, and it's life is not like that. Okay. And you find things where people are struggling to give birth, and then they go to another hemisphere for a honeymoon or something, and they fall pregnant. People are struggling to find jobs, and they go to another hemisphere and they easily find jobs. People are born in the northern hemisphere, for example, that are struggling to make things work, are struggling to find work, are struggling to make a job. They end up in a whole lot of negative situations. And then they go to the southern hemisphere, like they go to Australia, they form a rock band, and they're famous. So we're getting a reasoning for another complexity and reality of life is that people do move across the hemispheres. And I think one of the things I'm proposing here is that the change between the hemispheres does seem to provide a means to explain that, which before we never really had a means to explain that besides astrolocality, and that's something quite different, as again I will show in subsequent videos. Astrologer Robert Wilkinson says he thinks that the solar force is waxing in the north while it wanes in the south. So that mirrors like some of the statements of like astrologer Patrick Watson last year, who was saying things like the wattage of the sign is really what matters, not the season. But astrologer Robert Wilkinson does say that maybe we talk about the signs only from an elemental and modal perspective and not seasonally. So you find that people are now starting to move away from the seasonal thing because they, I guess, trying to wrestle with it. But again, I'm not seeing charts. I'm not seeing actual, consultations with people happening. It's all just people talking and making ideas. Astrologer David Rule, the tropical zodiac is based on the Earth-Sun relationship of seasons and corresponding declinations. Okay, that's correct. That's just how it is by design. Okay, it's not a new statement. That's just how tropical zodiac is by design. Therefore, the tropical zodiac is not of the sky, nor in the sky. The tropical zodiac has nothing to do with the sky, but was projected onto the sky at some point as a reference. So he's basically saying the terrestrial seasons and the directions that we are projecting onto space come from your place on Earth, and we are projecting that into the sky. Whereas the sidereal zodiac is created there in the sky as a backdrop of constellations, has some resonance to the constellations. The sidereal zodiac is not tied to the constellations, we know that, but it is sidereal in the sense that it's created from its sidereal reference point. Whereas the tropical zodiac, he's saying, is totally terrestrial in its origin. It's about Earth, on Earth, and the sun and the Earth relationship, and that is being projected onto space. Those directions are being projected onto space. The turning or tropics of those things are being projected onto space. So I'll get that. That makes sense. Okay, but again, here he's not here mentioning what to do with the southern hemisphere. He's just making a statement that the tropical zodiac, again, is a terrestrial thing. That's what he's saying. Astrologer Maurice McCann from Ireland is saying that his view is that the signs remain the same, but the rulerships change. So he's saying now Jupiter is ruling Virgo in the southern hemisphere, and Mars is ruling Taurus and Libra in the southern hemisphere. Now, I don't know about that. I haven't seen that happen, so I'm still testing that as I go, but I have not seen that yet in the charts I've looked at. I haven't seen the rulerships change of the signs, but I have seen the signs flip. But I'm putting it out there because that's what people have said. Astrologer Sue Tui, I believe he's passed away, so God bless her, and may she rest in peace. From a Skyscape forum in 2003 is basically stating that Australian astrologers have not thought about it, that is swapping the signs, in any great depth, and don't really want to because we have been taught and are used to a very basic form of astrology. If I see the sun in Aries in a southern chart, I know I'm looking at an autumn chart. So you see here with, I think, and that's true. And I myself am guilty of this. We get stuck into what we were taught, and we don't really think about it. We're not willing to have an open mind, really, to at least test something different, to challenge that conceptualization. Again, what I'm proposing, which is the flipping of the signs across the equatorial hemisphere, doesn't change anything about the construct of the tropical zodiac. It doesn't really break that down in any way. So she's saying that, again, this is more than 10 years ago, she's saying that I'm not seeing anyone really testing it. So that's what I'm trying to do here, and that's what I'm presenting to you. This is for the Patrick Watson, September 2018, regarding the flipping of the signs. He said that would become quickly complicated. Also, tropical astrologers from the Southern Hemisphere don't flip a flipping thing. I'm going to give this a hard pass. Now, that's a bit, farcical of an approach to the topic, I think, in my opinion. It's not really a serious consideration, as you can see, which I think is a disservice to the art of astrology. Things should be looked at quite seriously. And I know he does look at things really seriously because he is one of those astrologers that really are at the forefront of new techniques, I would say, innovating and thinking outside the box. So I was a bit surprised by the statement that he didn't really consider it because other astrologers didn't seem to do it. But anyway, we'll give him the benefit of the doubt. In the same blog post, he proposed that the signs are, not seasonal, but they are symbolic of a so-called wattage of sunlight. So the northern Cancer and southern tropical Capricorn, have the same wattage of sunlight. And there he's paraphrasing Israeli astrologer Michael Ofek. I don't know. Yes, I agree with that. Like I said, it's a paradigm of sunlight, light and dark. Okay. And again, that's what Ptolemy was saying, cold and low light. He wasn't just saying cold, only winter. He was saying also cold and dark. Okay. The sunlight in winter is weak. Okay. So I don't see any contradiction here. He's proposing the primacy of northern-centric astrological symbolism. He's saying that it's a choice based upon the motion of the Earth in space, which appears to be in the northerly direction as defined on Earth. So we take the north direction as we've defined it on Earth and project that into space. And from the perspective of the galactic center, that seems to be the direction in which the Earth is moving, our north in space. So everything from the north is sort of, if you think about the Earth moving through space in a our north direction, okay, with reference to the galactic plane. Again, I think that's not invalid, but I don't think that has anything to do with the swapping of the zodiacs. What I think is happening there is that is possibly, and this is a hypothesis, that is possibly a reason why perhaps Northern Hemisphere seems to be the source of innovations and techie ideas and political gestations that then are finding their way filtering or imposed upon the Southern Hemisphere. Disproportionately so. Maybe that is the reason, that is the justification for that, is that, as the Earth is moving in a so-called projected northerly direction, those so-called winds of change are coming from north to south. I mean, I don't know. Okay. That's also open up. But it's an idea that is out there and that someone has proposed, so we have to look at it and take it into account. Recently, I had a talk with astrologer Gemini Brett in the USA, and I'm paraphrasing here and concisely kind of putting his point that he was saying the tropical zodiac is a directional thing and not just a seasonal thing, um, as I understood what he was saying. And again, that's, no one's arguing about that because tropical means turning, and by design, the tropical zodiac turning of the seasons is tied to turning of directions. So that's just how the Earth-Sun relationship is. It's not like, it's like a chicken-egg situation, but it's that is how it is by design. They are not mutually exclusive things. So I would look at it as seasonal, and that also means that it's directional. I don't look at them as separate things. Astrologer Adam Ellenbach, this is something I added recently based on recent Facebook discussions, because it's taken me a while to put the series of YouTube videos together. And in that time, coincidentally, people have also been putting their ideas on Facebook. So astrologer Adam Ellenbach from the USA recently posted something where he said, the zodiac was not inherently seasonal. It was mathematical, divinatory, numerological, and ideal. The seasons are based on the zodiac, not the other way around. Now, there's a couple of things there, which, again, as I'm saying, I do not believe the mathematics of the zodiac and its construction and design, the divinatory aspect of it, the numerological construction of it, that's not changing if you flip the signs. It's still 12, it's still 4 elements, it's still modality of 3, it's still, the ideal numerological construction is still there. If you're flipping the signs across the hemisphere, you're not undoing any of that. So I don't take that as an argument really to say don't flip the signs, because you're actually not deconstructing the sort of roots of how it's being constructed in any way at all. You're just looking at it from a different perspective, that's all. And I think a more true perspective, because the turning of the starting of the year, spring, is really going to be spring. You understand what I'm saying? The increase of light is really going to be the increase of light in the southern hemisphere. So that's the one point. The other point that he's mentioned is that the seasons are based on the zodiac and not the other way around. I mean, with that, I think I would just... I mean, with that, what I would say is, sorry, I should wait for the guy to pass by. But with that, what I'm, people knew about the seasons before they knew about the zodiac. I think that makes sense, because the birth of agriculture and civilization, we don't know if it was really coincident with the zodiac, but the zodiac is something that has been projected from our minds into space, the portions of space and things, and people would have had to develop an observational history before being able to do that of the sky. But the seasons were always there, and it's something people noticed first. So I don't think the zodiac is based on the seasons. I think people knew the seasons were there and noticed that the turning of the seasons, which became then the turning of the signs, or the archetypes. So I'm not really sure about that. I'll have to look at the history a bit more, but I just know that people knew about the seasons first. So it just seems natural for them to link the seasons with then what they conceive of later as solar months and the associated archetypes. So, okay, but that's my view about what is, I think, currently out there, and that's sort of my assessment of that. So again, I'm not putting down anything that the people are saying here. I'm just saying that this is what is being said. None of them are based on evidence or looking at charts. Most of them are just based upon this is what I think. But again, the main things are having two charts on either side of the equator being different as not making sense. I don't think that doesn't make sense. I think it makes a lot of sense, okay? Especially because people don't stay on the equator the rest of their life. My conclusion is that the tropical zodiac is truly seasonal and truly fluid across the equatorial hemisphere. And I find with charts of people that have moved hemispheres, it really does make a difference, and it really does change. And yes, if you're looking for a fixed paradigm about who you are, look at the Sidereal Zodiac and Vedic astrology. But because that's how it is constructed from something that is relatively fixed, okay? But if you're thinking about the tropical zodiac as, yes, our willpower is being environmentally determined as well, or negotiated with our environment, which I believe is also reflective of how life happens, then all I'm saying is that when I flip the signs for people that are changing hemispheres, I see the correspondence. Now, let me share some of that with you. So the summary that I have here is that, and again, I'm going to be demonstrating this in subsequent videos with charts upon charts upon charts, because I just want to see charts, okay? The tropical zodiac used in Western astrology is truly seasonal and therefore fluid across the equatorial hemispheres. So I'm looking at it as an update or enhancement of the practice of Western tropical astrology that's appropriate for all clients at birth and also thereafter. So you're born somewhere, but you're moving to a different hemisphere. And things change. Things do change. That's been my experience of it. And it's been the way I've gone back and looked at things, and things have been a lot clearer after doing that. But again, I'll be sharing all of this with you. There's another note here about the impact of, the Southern Tropical flip. Using the Southern Tropical Zodiac does provide, I think for the first time, a facility to explain why and when people move between hemispheres, marry across hemispheres, move to a country and then have a child. It just gives more richness and depth to the why we are moving across the world. We are negotiating with the environment of the planet in that way. And I think that is a more holistic way of looking at it rather than a static conversation of you're born with this and that's not changing. So that's what I think, because I like using the Western Tropical Zodiac because it feels to me more of a feminine archetype, that you are involved with it, you're negotiating with it, you are able to exhibit more of that free will with it. Whereas the Sidereal Zodiac, to me, in practice, appears to be a lot less negotiable and pretty fixed. Maybe it's a more masculine archetype, you could say. And Robert Zoller did say in the lessons that we did that he thought of the two zodiacs as masculine and feminine as well, and he left it at that. He didn't really explain anything. So I do now see things like that as they should be used together, okay? It also sort of debunks this whole North is right stuff that's going on, or, it was made in the Northern Hemisphere, therefore that's the paradigm, but the paradigm is universal, but it's, so choose the one it is. It's the Northern Hemisphere, it's universal. Okay. Now I'm proposing this because it is actually making it a universal paradigm in practice, in using the charts. And I've done this also by observing astrologers in the Southern Hemisphere talk about their life. And you look at what they are doing, and it's like, okay, it's obvious. You have someone with a Scorpio stellium, Northern Tropical, and yet they are so much about their body, and they're so much about what they're putting in and taking care of their physical life. That's their whole life story, and that's how they talk. And so it's interesting to see, and that's why astrologers are maybe not the best subject to use when looking at this or flipping or testing, because what I find is that, and I've gone through it myself, believe me, where we sort of live our life based upon what the chart is telling us, as opposed to just living our life like a normal person without being informed or modified by anything that we so-called think we are. So I've done this flip with in talks of normal people, non-astrological people, we all are normal, but non-astrologically, brainwashed so-called people. I've done this flip with them in public talks in South Africa, and it seems to, if they are not astrologers, it's easy for them to see, oh, that is obvious. One marketing agent said to me, oh, well, now I really understand the clients I had this whole damn week. It all does make sense. So it should be like that. Astrology should be like that. It should be simple. If you know what you're doing, the truth should be evident. It shouldn't be something you have to go, you know, and use archaic methods to find. It should be something that is there, because that is how astrology should be, in my opinion. Using the Southern Tropical Zodiac flip also provided the more dynamic, true to reality practice of astrology, which reflects the complexity of its interpretation across the globe. So someone may have a very nice planet come into their seventh house by astrolocality, but that doesn't mean they're getting married, does it? But their Venus is flipping. Now that changes everything, because Venus is the controller for marriage. That makes more sense. Significator for marriage. So, but also, like I said, about people that are moving hemispheres, the fertility cases, the marriage cases, the giving childbirth cases, the job cases, even running a global business, because where are you investing your money? Where are you opening branches of your company? Because I do advise for business astrology like that. And we've seen that difference. So it really changes the perspective on financial indicators, that your financial indicators, your fertility indicators, they are actually changing as you move across the hemispheres. And I've seen that in my own life, and that's something that I think I'm going to demonstrate to you going forward. And like I said, because I view the tropical zodiac in Western astrology as more free will involved with it, in that way, it's more negotiable, in my opinion. Because of this, you can go where things are stronger for you. And now we have a way to show that very obviously for people. And that's the other plus point about flipping the zodiac. It becomes a more negotiable paradigm. Your free will really does come into play. And I'll demonstrate that with charts. So this is my vision about the whole thing, because I am also practicing Vedic astrology. So for me, I'm not coming at this from a Vedic is better than Western or Western is better than, again, I'm coming at this from a everything is there. They both are paradigms that exist. One is maybe more fixed or non-localized or more masculine. Maybe that's the Vedic astrology, using the sidereal zodiac and those techniques. And, it's also the one that hasn't been broken, for centuries. So it is fixed from also that point of view in terms of the tradition. And then there's Western astrology, which seems to be now more fluid, more localized sunlight paradigm, and that allows more facility for free will to operate with it now with this flipping the zodiac situation. So that's the model that I practice and that I work on, and that's how I've seen it happen in charts with people. So in sidereal zodiac, I am Pisces Jupiter rising. Another person is also Pisces Jupiter rising in the sidereal Vedic astrology paradigm. But they are born in the northern hemisphere, and I am born in the southern hemisphere. They are tropical Aries Jupiter. They are much more forceful and somewhat aggressive about the Jupiter than I am. My Jupiter is Libra tropically, Southern Tropical Zodiac. And my whole approach is not about creating something new in the world. That's not the primary thing I'm about. The primary thing I'm about is coming together in harmony and balance, the different kinds of astrology, that it's not one or the other. And I really abhor this conflict thing, because I am pretty Libran like that. Anybody who knows me in that way first. So here's some there's some exceptions here that I think for the testing, as far as I've seen, when there are connections in the chart that connect so-called travel, where travel emphasis seems to be strong, connections between the 12th house and the first house, the 9th house and the first house, where that seems to be there, you should be aware that this person may have traveled. You need to find out where they are, because if you're using the tropical zodiac flip, you need to know which hemisphere they are in. Charts are found that have the nodal axis on the ascendant or the midheaven, also exhibit tendency to like go away and be more mobile across the globe than others. And of course, people that are born with eclipses also tend to exhibit that. So these are the exceptions so far. The exceptions, or I shouldn't say exceptions, they're more considerations. Just like in horary astrology, you have considerations before judgment. In these cases are things where you need to be a little bit more careful about how you interpret it, because the signs might flip more. Or not, they may resist the flip. So this is what I've seen happens in charts. Okay, so here's my chart. I'm just going to keep this up here. On the right-hand side is the Northern Tropical Zodiac, and the left-hand side is the Southern Tropical Zodiac, where the signs have been flipped. Nothing else has changed. The rulerships haven't changed. The aspects haven't changed. The midpoints haven't changed. But, I mean, the sign rulerships haven't changed. But the houses have changed, their rulership. That's the only thing that's different here. And I'm born in the Southern Hemisphere, but I've also moved to the Northern Hemisphere and back again. So I'm going to talk to you about that from my own chart experience, so you can get a sense of what I'm going on about here. All right. So I'm born with Sun in Virgo. I've always been analytical. I've been trained as a scientist. In high school, in primary school, actually, I was a nerd. I will proclaim that. I studied special relativity for fun in high school because in my final 2 years, I finished the school syllabus on my own, within the first 3 months of the year. And then I gave free tuition to my friends for the rest of the year. You can see here that, okay, the Virgo Mercury is in the 12th sign, but in the 11th house. Let me just get the annotation material up here, because I find just talking about an example can make things a little bit easier for people to understand. So the 12th sign Mercury, ruler of the sun, shows that for this academic scholarly nature of mine, analytical nature of mine, I will become known. It will be recognized. And that is true, okay? It is in the 11th house, so I use that in my social engagement with my friends. I mean, that's what I did in high school. And it was quite fun. I was known as the nerdy guy, that's what it was. And this is a very extreme Mercury expression. It's unaspected really in the chart, anything seriously. So in terms of a visible planet, it's not aspected to a visible planet in any way. So it's a very emphasized Mercury in my life and in my chart. It rules the 9th house of scholarship as well. So that also emphasizes it very strongly. And in the ruler of the chart, firstly, you've got Libra rising, Jupiter in Libra. That is who I am. That is what I'm proposing to people all over the place. I tell Vedic astrologers that Western astrology is not a bunch of psychobabble and that there is truth to it also. Similarly, I'm also telling Western astrologers that Vedic astrology is not as complicated and is not, trying to demystify it. And also, it's the reason why I really find this whole which one is right, which one came first, which zodiac is better sort of conversation very sort of abhorrent and counterproductive, because I believe we need to come together and have a balanced view about things and know what tools are available to us and make a discernment and choice about what works for us better. And it's not about, which one came first, because the first car that we made wasn't really the best car that we had. So it doesn't really make sense to me why people are going on bickering about, zodiac debate. It's not a debate in my view. You just got to learn and understand what you're looking at and choose which one works better for you. So I am Jupiter in Libra. Now, you could say that, well, Theo, what you're proposing is Jupiter in Aries, because, you're going to be creating enemies and attacks and blah, blah, by what you're saying. And that's okay, because that is appropriate for the Northern Hemisphere. For the Northern Hemisphere, what I am is Jupiter in Aries. I am a third world country native of mixed cultural heritage. I am bringing together East and West and North and South, and that is where I'm born. I'm born in South Africa, which is between East and Western hemispheres. I'm born as an Indian cultural heritage, ethnic heritage is Indian, but I'm born in the Southern Hemisphere. So my whole life is actually symbolic of East and West together and North and South together. So I don't have a problem with this kind of conversation, okay? And I find that really exhibited in the Libra rising. Now, the Leo Venus in the 11th, now you might say, well, Theo, you're not an actor, you're not on the stage, you're not, flashy in that way. I suppose you could say that, but that's only if you restrict Leo to being, flamboyant. But that's not Leo. Leo is also very self-assured. And that is me when it comes to my engagement. The 11th house, the ruler of the chart is the direction in life. That's what we say. How you're making decisions for your life. The ruler of the ascendant is showing that. And mine is in the 11th house, and it's in Venus. It's a Venus archetype. And I've been surrounded by female friends my entire life. That is it. If you know me, that is me. It's me and my friends, and that's what's really important to me, okay, in my life. I've always been involved in organizations. In primary school, in high school, I was involved in 3 organizations at one point. At university, I was involved in 2 or 3 organizations while having jobs. Now I'm involved with OPA. I'm a representative for OPA for South Africa. I'm a representative for the CIA in Australia for South Africa. I'm representing Vedic astrology to groups of Western astrologers. I'm representing Western astrology to groups of Vedic astrologers. So this 11th house is really Leo. I'm proving myself. I'm proving something in a very short sort of way, and I'm creating something maybe that is new. But that's who I am. That is who I am. And people who know me know that I really care about being diplomatic, although sometimes I will flip and that Leo nature does come out, Now, interesting thing in high school is Venus has a sextile to Saturn in Gemini in the 9th house. And in high school, one of the things that I really cared about doing that I chose to do was I wrote and directed a 5-act play for one of the organizations I was a secretary for. And by the way, in all the organizations I've been a part of, I've been in an administrative role as a secretary or president in 2 cases. So you can see that Venus connected to Saturn, Venus, the ruler of the chart. In high school, I wrote a 5-act play for a cultural organization at in high school. And that is much more, obvious of a joining of Gemini and Leo energies, okay, into the 11th house. That's more obvious, okay? Whereas if you look at here, Aries rising in the Northern Tropical, Mars in Taurus, that's not who I am. I'm not a rough and ready kind of person. I'm not, I don't see myself that way. I can't really explain that. But in the Northern Hemisphere, I can explain that. And I'll explain that to you because I went abroad to study. I went to the USA on a full scholarship. So let's look at the next thing, right? When Pluto here in the Southern Tropical, you have Pluto in Taurus on the 8th house cusp. And when Pluto transited my natal Saturn in the 9th house, normally you would say you're going to have a huge upheaval and change in your life. The foundational structures are going to change. Now in the Northern Tropical, the Saturn rules the 10th house and the 11th house. And it's a Pluto from the 8th house cusp that is hitting that. So huge, you can say, destruction, death sort of connotation there coming to bear on the ruler of the 10th house, the angles of the chart. Your public role is completely, breaking down because that's the nature of Pluto and the 8th house, especially a Scorpio seed of Pluto to the ruler of the 10th house. Now, you always know what an outer planet is going to do based upon the ruler of the outer planet in the chart. In the Northern Tropical, the Pluto is ruled by a Mars in detriment and out of sect Mars. And so that Pluto hitting the Saturn should have been an experience that was painful and destructive because the ruler of the 8th house, the ruler of the Pluto, is a detriment out of sect Mars, which traditionally speaking in Western astrology would be a terrible experience. But as Pluto transited my natal Saturn, almost within 2 or 3 days, I received a full scholarship to go and study in the USA. And I was the only Indian person in the whole country of South Africa that accepted that scholarship. So it was a phenomenal rise of status. It lifted my status up financially and also with my community, because I had to come back to work for this company. So I really don't see how that can happen with that transit in Western astrology, Northern Tropical. But let's look at the Southern Tropical chart for a moment. The ruler of the Pluto, first of all, Pluto's in Taurus, so it's something also financial, okay? The ruler of the Pluto is Venus in the 11th house of income, and the Venus is the ruler of the chart. That's huge. That's totally different kind of Pluto energy, okay? And the Pluto is in the same sign as an exalted moon ruling the 10th house. The implication of the sponsorship was that we're going to sponsor your foreign studies, Saturn in the 9th house, okay? We're going to pay for everything because we want you to come back and work for us. See, the moon is there with Pluto in the same sign. So that made a lot more sense to me, that the Pluto, who's with an exalted moon, who is ruled by the ruler of the chart in a financial house, is now approaching by transit Saturn. And yes, the Saturn is what? Saturn is the ruler of the 4th house in the 9th house. I moved abroad to study. That was the whole thing. Okay? And this brought me a whole lot of exaltation personally, because the Mercury rules the 9th house, is exalted. And it's also the ruler of the sun. So that's the prominence that I had from that whole thing. The ruler of the sun is given the prominence. So, I was one of 6 people in the whole country, and the only person of my racial or ethnic background to get that scholarship. That's a huge deal. There was no way I would predict that for somebody if I knew the transit happened of Pluto to Saturn in the Northern Tropical chart. There's no way, because the ruler of the 9th house is combust, and it's in the 12th house. On the ascendant, yeah, sure, but it's still nevertheless combust, because combustion is a astronomical phenomena. It's not boxed by the signs. So that, and then the ruler of the 8th house, which is receiving other people's money in the Northern Tropical, is a detriment to outer sect Mars. That really does not in any way speak to getting a full-blown scholarship to us. I mean, it was a lot more obvious to say that and make sense of that transit now by flipping the sign of the zodiac, because I'm born in the southern hemisphere. So that was the most obvious thing, difference that I could see, because it just made so much more sense. And it's easy to read the chart now. I don't have to now try and find a way to make that work. Look, transits are not going to change. The contact points are not going to change. But the rulership of the houses can change the whole thing, as I've just demonstrated to you. This is what I was talking about. The transit, 17th of November 2004, transiting Pluto hit the Saturn, and everything changed in my life. Yes, it is a Pluto hitting Saturn. The whole structure of your life is going to fundamentally change. Yes, it did, but it changed for the better. And you only get that from the Southern Tropical chart. I'm going to skip that. Oh yes, if I relocate my chart to Texas, Lubbock, where I went to, so I went from the Southern Hemisphere to the Northern. And here Mars is angular on the descendant. Okay, so yes, if I go back to my natal chart, Mars does rule the 7th house in my chart. And it's in Scorpio, okay, in my 2nd house. So that does show that Mars does rule that, okay. The other thing I wanted to say here, oh yes, so when in the relocated chart, the ruler of the natal 7th house is on the 7th house cusp. And I did have my first relationship there, but it wasn't good at all. It started off fine. My natal Mars is in good condition in Scorpio, but in the northern hemisphere, that Mars is in Taurus. And it really did, I mean, that was Mars out of sect experience, okay? There was a lot of fighting and arguments, and a lot of that happened, okay? There were good times as well, but there was a lot of that also happening, because also in the northern hemisphere, my moon goes into Scorpio. So it wasn't really great. The other thing I would say about this transit, if you want to be circumspect about it, is that you could say, well, in Northern Tropical Theo, the ruler of the ninth house, Sagittarius, is Jupiter, and that's come to the descendant and the nodal axis. Yes, but it's come to this, the south node. It's the seventh house, and natally, Jupiter is combust in Aries. So again, the ruler of that, and you say, well, the ruler of that seventh house transit of Jupiter is the Venus in Aquarius in the 11th. So you could look at it that way, but you don't get the sense of prominence from it, because the Mercury ruling the ninth house, being the ruler of the sun, exalted, you don't get the exalted moon in the eighth house. That is what happened. I received a whole lot of money. It wasn't just me traveling. This transit of Jupiter to the seventh house cusp, which is like, okay, are you going to travel? If it's ruling the ninth house, you're meeting people that are causing you trouble. Okay, yeah, sure, but what is showing the amount of money that I got? The exaltation of status that happened. You don't get that in Northern Tropical. You know, you don't really. So again, Southern Tropical is just a lot more. The dignity of it, of that whole scenario that changed my life, comes through very, very clearly. Right. The other thing I want to say here about the two charts, this may be the last point, is if I look at this Southern Tropical chart, okay, the ruler of my fourth house, which traditionally represents father, okay, is Saturn in Gemini with Aquarius, with Uranus in Gemini. My father has worked in the telecommunications industry all his life, all his working life. And he's been in the planning division. The ruler of the fourth house is Mercury in Virgo. Done. My mother was a very beautiful person. She did die a year after I was born. So you see the 10th house having the Neptune in Cancer archetype there. And the moon is in Taurus. My mother, everyone says, was really beautiful, and things like that. So that's, for me, that makes a lot more sense than having a Scorpio moon there. She wasn't a Scorpio kind of person, from what everyone has told me about her and her life. So that makes more sense. Yes, it's in the 8th house, sure. Okay. I also had a twin that died at birth, a younger sibling that died. So the 3rd house, I have an elder sibling, which I don't really see that often. But so the elder sibling would be the 11th house, to distinguish them. And that's the sun in Virgo in the 12th. Sure. But the main point here was that the 3rd house, which can show siblings in general and younger siblings specifically, the 3rd house ruler in Southern Tropical is Jupiter, which is combust. So that made more sense that I lost my sister, my twin sister, at birth. Here in the Northern Tropical, you say the 3rd house ruler is a Mercury that's in fall and in detriment. But combustion is more clear that they are not there. Okay, and I actually didn't know about my twin sister until 2017, because nobody talked about it. So it was really a combust situation. It really was a combust situation. It was very, hidden. It was really hidden. Like, my father kept it a secret. So that is much more plainly obvious with the 3rd house ruler being combust. So you'd rather have 3rd house ruler in Pisces, which you could argue, but combustion as a technique is more about something being hidden. That's exactly what it was. The other thing is the 4th house ruler being Saturn in Gemini. My father's sun sign in Southern Tropical is Gemini. The 10th house ruler being the moon in Taurus, okay, the mother. My biological mother's sun sign, Southern Tropical, is Taurus. So a lot of these things are just making a lot more sense when I look at it from this point of view. Now, I did study in the Northern Hemisphere. So I lived in the Northern Hemisphere, and there were so many money problems. You know, the company, yes, I signed the contract in the Southern Hemisphere, thank God, where my financial indicators are very strong, obviously, as you can see. In the Northern Hemisphere, when I was residing in university for those 4 years, we had to always run after them to pay. Payments came late. I had to borrow money sometimes at times because payments were not coming through. So you can see the Northern Hemisphere, the detriment of the second house ruler and the eighth house ruler, the moon going into debilitation, fall in the eighth house, the Mars ruler of the chart going into detriment in the second house. I became extremely money conscious because of what was not being made available at the time. Okay, so that makes much more sense to me. That is what happened to me that's what happened to my financial life when I was living in the Northern Hemisphere for those 4 years. Yes, the money was given to me based upon the Southern Hemisphere indicator and transit. But when I moved to the Northern Hemisphere, things were really going. I had money stolen from me, I had fraud, I had people break into my bank account. When the moon was activated in 2007 by perfection in the Northern Hemisphere. So there were all of those issues happening in the Northern Hemisphere. And in the Northern Hemisphere, my chart, my 10th house becomes ruled by Saturn. There's a Capricorn Neptune there, and I've worked in the oil industry, okay? Which you would see in the Southern Tropical chart because my second house contains a Scorpio Mars, all right? So you would see all those things in different ways. But I went to the Northern Hemisphere to get the study of the oil and the education of the oil, and then I worked for that same company, and it was fine. My financial stability came back when I moved back in 2009 to South Africa and started working for the company. It was all right. I had promotions. I enjoyed a lot of felicity in the workplace, and recognition, because I really was a researcher, and the analysis part of me really kicked in again. In university in the Northern Hemisphere, I really wasn't a good student. I missed classes. I, really wasn't really about that at all. The ruler of the 10th house became Saturn in the 9th, and it was difficult for me at university in the Northern Hemisphere. It really was. The other instance when I moved to the Northern Hemisphere was in 2015, when I emigrated to the UK to work because I had been acquired by a company, an oil company based in London. So I went to work in the Northern Hemisphere. So that's the second time that I moved hemispheres. I went to the Northern Hemisphere, and what happened, sorry about the dogs barking outside. Oh, see, they calmed down now. So I went to work in the Northern Hemisphere in London, and so the chart changed again. And within 9 months, within 6 months, we had Brexit happen in the UK in 2016. By September 2016, they were telling me things, September 2015, within a month of getting there, they were telling me things like, we're going to have cuts, we're not sure about your position, because first come, first out sort of scenarios seem to be happening. And by March 2016, I was let go. I was made redundant. And so that whole financial thing collapsed again. That fall of the moon, the detriment of the Mars became so manifest when I was in the Northern Hemisphere. I went from earning thousands of pounds a month after tax to nothing. But by the time June 2017 came along, I had no money at all. It was the chart, as true to the Northern Tropical chart, is extremely impoverished from a financial point of view. Okay, so it really was that, and it was not easy. It was difficult. Okay, I experienced a lot of trauma because of the financial issue. I felt stuck because of my financial issue, and you can see in the Northern Tropical chart, the ruler of the chart, Mars, is in detriment in Taurus in the second house. And that was very true to my experience in the Northern Hemisphere, the years from 2015 to 2017. Now, what I will also tell you, in the Northern Hemisphere zodiac, the fourth house is Cancer, and it's ruled by the moon in Scorpio in fall, okay? And the week that I moved into my apartment in London, I activated my fourth house in the Northern Hemisphere. My father, fourth house, contracted and was diagnosed with cancer in the Scorpio part of his body. That was coincidence. To this day, I could not explain until now. Okay, but when I came back to South Africa in July 2017, almost 2 years later, okay, and I landed and I picked up the phone. It was a surprise, you know. I didn't tell my parents my flight path or anything because I know they'd be worrying, as parents, you know, do. But I landed in Cape Town and I settled down and I called them and said, hey, I'm back in South Africa. And my mother at the time was on the phone. I mean, they were at the clinic in 2017. And she said, you know what? It's funny because your father was at the clinic just now and they just cleared him of the cancer. So I go to the Northern Hemisphere. My fourth house ruler becomes Scorpio moon in the eighth house. I move into my house in London. My father contracts or diagnosed with cancer in the rectum. I move back 2 years later to South Africa. My fourth house ruler now becomes the Saturn again. Nothing to do with the eighth house. Okay. My father is cured of the cancer. Now, I'm not saying there's a causal relationship, but I find it very interesting. Up to this day, there was no other way for me to explain that. Whether by perfections or transit or progressions, nothing. There was no other way for me to explain that sort of coincidence, well, at least in Western astrology, unless I do this, unless this happened. And it's so clear. It's so clear. It's just so clear. The professions of my parents, what they did. You can see the nature of my relationship. The first time I went to the USA, I moved to the Northern Hemisphere. You would ask, well, to study, what happened to your father? And my mother would say, very politely or euphemistically, he went into depression. So the first time I moved to the USA, I went to the Northern Hemisphere. My fourth house ruler changed to Scorpio moon in the eighth house, and my father went into depression. And I know they're being nice when they say that because that's how my parents are. Okay, so yeah, you know, I would really. This is an example, of course, of my own chart and looking at things that are presented to you, and it's just made everything so much clearer. I mean, I love baking. I'm loving to make bread. I've always cooked for people. I've always done barbecues for people. I've been the food guy. I know where good food is. My 10th house is Cancer with the Taurus moon, okay? I've just been, I love doing, serving people and hosting people and making food for them. You know, that's what I am known for because the midheaven is the point of prominence in the chart. And for that activity, you become prominent. So people know me as analytical. People know me as research-driven. People know me, well, the people that are my friends here, know me for cooking, for loving food, for demonstrating with food, for loving that and experiencing that. And that's my connection to my mother. So it's so strong. It is just so strong. The Neptune Cancer archetype is something that really resonates in my whole family, you know, the mother on the pedestal or the archetype of the mother, the divine feminine is my path in life. And that is very true for everyone that knows me. The whole concept of Spica Astrology, the reasoning why I named it Spica Astrology in my business is because it is the only constellational reference that in the zodiac that is feminine. So there's a lot there with my 10th house. And of course, as an astrologer, that's what I'm doing the moon, the ruler of my 10th house is in Taurus. And I advise people primarily with financial astrology, business astrology, and that's what I do. Okay. I'm really good at doing financial astrology for people. I've done workshops on that. I've done 4 or 5 workshops on that in South Africa. So it's just what my strengths are and what makes sense to me. Look, even if my planets were becoming debilitated, I would go with it, with the flip, because it would reflect my life. And people who know me know that I wouldn't be telling you this if I didn't think there was something to it. It was such a huge shift. I've never resonated with Aries rising my entire life. I'm not an aggressive person. I'm not in people's face. I'm not like, you know, and I always thought that was all Pisces. No, I'm extremely diplomatic. I'm not Pisces. I don't go to kumbaya circles. I don't resonate with that. You won't find me meditating out on the beach in a group somewhere. You wouldn't find me doing Pisces, Western astrology, Pisces things. Don't go to Burning Man or things like that. I don't. I've been to chakra dance one time and I really found it icky. Okay. I don't gel with those things from a Western astrology interpretation of Pisces, so, but Virgo, give me Virgo any day. I am Virgo. Okay. I care about the salt, the starter for the bread that I make, and pH and the amount of bubbles that I see, and I track that. And I have Excel spreadsheets for everything in astrology. I've always done that. So my teachers have also very strong Virgo in their charts. So, Mercury ruling the 9th house is in Virgo. My teachers have Virgo somewhere very strong, whether it's the rising sign or it's their sun sign or something. So, and naturally, when people talk to me, the other day on a WhatsApp group, someone was saying, "Oh, you must have a moon in Taurus somewhere," and they don't know my chart. Okay, so all I'm saying is think about it. So, what I want to say as the last thing here is a call for research in this. So obviously this is something new, probably, and I would like people to contribute to the conversation, not just by telling me what you think, but I would actually like to build a database for charts of people born in the Southern Hemisphere, which I've done. I've collected and extracted charts available on Astrology Bank already from the Southern Hemisphere that are A and AA rated. So I've done that research work already, which I'll be obviously sharing with you in subsequent videos. But I would also like, charts of normal people, everyday people. So if you have clients that are giving consent to share their details and experience for the sake of this research project, please send me an email or send me a message. And that's what I would like us to start doing, is to maintain a database, because the Astro Data Bank database is extremely Euro-US centric, and it's also extremely like celebrity, artist, musician, movie actor centric, and also on the extreme centric, serial killers and things like that. But we need more charts of normal everyday people to also test with those things. I've got charts of my own research and my own client database. With permission, I'll be sharing with you in subsequent videos. But I hope that with this, we are moving to a holistic view of astrology in the world, and as practicing astrologers of Western Tropical Astrology. Like I said, my current viewpoint from a holistic astrology point of view is Vedic, and sidereal seems to be more fixed, i.e. masculine, and tropical Western is more negotiable in the way it seems to work by showing the changing of signatures, as I demonstrated with my own chart. The 2 times I did move between hemispheres, it was so clear. It was just so clear, you can't make it up. One of the times was here. I did a talk online on 20th of May with an astrologer, the night that we had a moon Jupiter conjunction in Southern Tropical Gemini in my 9th house. In that evening, I was doing a joint online talk with an astrologer from the USA who's known as Gemini Brett. And that was so obvious, okay? Gemini, ninth house, that's what I was doing, okay? So, in my ninth house capacity, you know, foreign land, foreign person, consultant. So again, by looking at transits and things like that, there's so much more that pops up. The more I look at it in charts of myself and other people and clients, and really with perfections, which is what I'll be demonstrating to you, you really do see this difference. I'm opening up the platform for people out there to talk about it, to please look at charts, because, you know, I'm insanely Virgo about that. That's what I care about. Yes, it may have been originated in the Northern Hemisphere, and the concepts are not changing. It's still divinatory. It's still numerologically consistent. We're not breaking that up, okay, by flipping the signs, because summertime is that for us. End of September is the beginning of rising of the day, okay, whatever you want to call it, season or not, you know, that is end of September for us. And I'll demonstrate that in the charts as we go forward in mundane astrology especially. So thank you for your time and thank you for listening. I know it's been a long video, but most of the themes and the conversations and the concepts have been sort of discussed and, you know, made evident to you now. And the subsequent videos are just going to be looking at charts upon charts upon charts and just opening up the conversation. And look, I might have 200 charts right now, and maybe this is the hypothesis for now, but who knows, maybe once I have 800 or 900 or 1,000 chart examples, my conclusion might be totally different, you know, and I'm happy to admit that. But I want there to be a conversation that's based upon charts. So in the subsequent videos, I'll be doing examples of natal astrology, doing examples of mundane astrology, doing examples of electional astrology, doing examples of synastry, which is extremely interesting across the hemispheres, and astrolocality, and also transits, as you've also seen, we show you as well. So yeah, stay tuned, and thank you for listening. Again, Naicker from Spica Astrology, bringing astrology to life. Thank you very much.